Welcome to Now in the 90s, where we look at the game releases of 30 years ago today. This week, Capcom's Sega salvage attempt, a cutesy platformer, and y'all remember this cartoon? Hi, I'm your host Jared, and today is September 29th, 1993. It's been hyped up for almost a year, now finally out, and several months late. Released for the Sega Genesis on September 27th, 1993, was Street Fighter II Special Champion Edition. Street Fighter II Special Champion Edition is the updated follow-up to the widely popular one-on-one fighting game. The gameplay remains the same. Beat the crap out of your opponent until they can't stand up anymore. Use special moves like Hadoukens, lightning kicks, and Yoga Fire. The biggest addition, aside from rebalanced characters and some new combos, are that the 4 boss characters are now completely playable. Defeat all who stand in your way to see your selected character's ending, and of course, face off in 2-player versus mode. Street Fighter II Champion Edition is the second version of Street Fighter II. It was first in arcades in March 1992, about a year after the original version's release. The original Street Fighter II then came to the Super NES in July of 1992 and has since dominated the sales charts in popularity. Sega owners could only be envious. At least, not for long. Rumors of a Sega Street Fighter started way before anything was officially announced, with rumblings beginning around October of 1992. It wasn't made official until Capcom showcased a prototype at a joint Capcom-Sega press conference in San Francisco in April 1993. With that announcement, Genesis owners were not only invigorated at having their own Street Fighter II, it was that they were going to have a better version of it, and it was going to release right at the beginning of summer. Now, of course, there was a very big problem with playing Street Fighter II on the Sega Genesis. The game uses a 6-button fighting style, 3 punches, 3 kicks from weak to strong. The Genesis controller only has 3 buttons. What they came up with was using the start button to toggle between punch and kick, which is cumbersome and awful. So at that same press conference, Sega also unveiled an official 6-button Sega Genesis controller. It was created specifically because Street Fighter II was coming to Sega. Other games would use this in the future, but for now, players at home can have the same control as they would in the arcades. Sold separately, of course. It also had the additional benefit of making it easier to play Mortal Kombat. This press announcement and joint conference was a really big deal at the time. This was the very first game that Capcom was making for Sega. Well, now hold on, Jared, I hear you say. The Genesis already had Capcom games like Ghouls and Ghosts and Strider. Those are Capcom games, and you are correct. However, those games were only licensed Capcom games, with all of those being developed by Sega themselves for their own platform. Street Fighter II Special Champion Edition is the first one Capcom was developing themselves internally. But not right away. This game was originally announced as Street Fighter II Champion Edition for Genesis and was supposed to come out in the summer, and once again, Capcom licensed out its development to a third-party studio. Capcom was too busy developing Street Fighter II Turbo for the SNES, and the third party's efforts were not good. Seeing the troubles it had, Capcom canceled that development and said, screw it, we'll do it ourselves. Sadly, this meant that it would be delayed from its summer release, instead aiming for September 1993, which was reported by news outlets. This also meant that Capcom had a little bit of extra time to put all the features of Street Fighter II Turbo into their Sega port. So yes, this Sega game is essentially the exact same as Street Fighter II Turbo on the SNES. However, this was still when Nintendo sat upon their throne made of money, fiercely constricting developers to exclusivity contracts. Capcom technically wasn't allowed to put Street Fighter II Turbo onto the Sega Genesis, but they were allowed to give them Street Fighter II Special Champion Edition. The September release also caused problems for Capcom. For one, they were competing with themselves. Special Champion Edition released weeks after Street Fighter II Turbo for the Super Nintendo. The other problem was it released after Mortal Kombat. Everyone knows about the console war, Nintendo versus Sega. But in 1993, there was another major fight. Street Fighter versus Mortal Kombat. You walked into the arcades of that year and you were either Hadouken or you were come here. People chose sides. Nobody stood in the middle. It wasn't just fans, even news outlets and the industry as a whole pitted the two against each other. Even Sega themselves addressed it directly with their advertising. Sadly, there were also development issues. This was the first time Capcom was developing for the Genesis directly, and they weren't super experienced, so some flaws in the game shows. It plays great, looks great, music is great, but the sound effects and the voices are awful. At its release, pretty much every review outlet still loved the game. EGM and GamePro both gave super high scores, but they all said the same thing. The sound was horrid. Anyone who's ever played this and had to fight Dalsum on a stage with the elephants knows to mute the TV. With the releases of Street Fighter II Turbo and Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter II Special Champion Edition didn't sell as well as they would have liked. It still sold amazing, over 1.5 million copies, but when you compare it to something like Mortal Kombat's 3 million units sold, you can't help but feel a little disappointed. Still, it's one of the finest Sega Genesis games you could have hoped to have. A platformer game so impressive, it almost became a Nintendo title. Released in September 1993 for the Super NES, was Plok. Plok is a side-scrolling platform game. Run, jump, and collect items for more points. Defeat enemies by using Plok's attacks like bouncing onto them or shooting out his fist to punch them. You can also find power-ups like a super buzzsaw mode or becoming some kind of robo super Plok. It also includes an easy mode that makes it into a baby game for babies. Get to the end of each level to raise a flag and laugh at whatever Plok's quip is, such as, and I quote, "I've been diddled again." Plok was developed by Software Creations, the same studio that made Spider-Man the X-Men and Arcade's Revenge and the Silver Surfer game for the NES. One of the best things about Plok is that it has incredible music. I mean, sounds that seem to exceed what the Super Nintendo was capable of. That's because, just like the Silver Surfer and the Spider-Man games, the music was done by Tim and Jeff Fallon, who just make banger after banger. Seriously, sometime give a listen to the Plok soundtrack. Software Creations was so confident in just how good Plok was, they pitched it to Nintendo so that they considered publishing it themselves. Even Shigeru Miyamoto said that it was excellent and that Plok could be the second best platformer, between Sonic and Mario, of course. And Nintendo was interested. They previewed the game in Nintendo Power issue 53, and German magazine Club Nintendo had a crossover comic featuring Plok and Mario. Nintendo did publish Plok, but only in Europe. Trade West handled the North American release, but it was this close to being a Nintendo game. It also reviewed really well. Electronic Gaming Monthly awarded an average score of an 8 out of 10, with the Editor's Choice Gold Award stating that Plok should not be overlooked. Nintendo Power graded it an average 3.5 out of 5 and gave it a lot of glowing praise. Their only complaint was that some levels aren't as fun as others. Software Creations thought for sure that Plok was going to be a hit. They had sequels planned, merchandise, comics, and toys. They could easily convert the game to port it onto the Sega Genesis, and even said they finished that port in an interview with GameFan magazine in April 1994. Sadly, Plok was released up against a slew of other mascot platformers of 1993. Aero the Acrobat, Rocky Rodin, Sparkster, Bubsy. It's one of those games that's never been ported or re-released onto anything else ever since. Dare to Care and Protect the Planet, released in September for the Super Nintendo, was Super Widget. Super Widget is a side-scrolling action platformer. Run, jump, and defeat enemies using Widget's stretchy punch attack. You can also transform into a wide variety of horrific monstrosities for new attacks, such as some kind of chicken, a walking bee, and a powerful Robo Widget. Defeat bosses at the end of each stage and do everything you can to help protect the environment. Super Widget is a game from Atlas. Yes, that Atlas, and is their second Widget game, the first one being for the NES in 1992. As for who or what the heck is Widget? Well, any of y'all ever watch that Widget cartoon?
Dare to care about the future of planet Earth. Experience Widget's all-new adventures as the pro-Earth purple alien hero works to make our world a better place. Get the World Watcher's spirit. Join Widget and his cosmically cool partner, Mega Brain, as they fight for truth, justice, and the Watcher way.
It was a cartoon about a purple alien named Widget, and he spent every episode talking about how to protect the planet and save the environment from pollution, which was all the rage in the early 90s. All I remember about the cartoon is that Widget could transform into wacky things. It aired from 1990 to 1991 over 2 seasons. The Super NES game is based on the show, featuring many of those same characters and some voice samples. It's an entirely different game than the NES one, so it isn't just an upgraded port. It's a little late to match the cartoon show's run, but syndication kept it on kids' TVs for a few years after it was canceled. How good was the game? Well, it depends on how much you like the cartoon and or how young and naive you were. GamePro magazine loved it, giving it very high remarks and with the highest score under its control. Nintendo Power's review said how awful the control actually is, especially in the hit detection, and the game could frustrate even the youngest of players. Electronic Gaming Monthly scored a 4 out of 10 because of how bad the controls were. It's another one of those games that's never been re-released, probably because who would care about a new widget game at any other point in time? But hey, at least we got to collectively remember the cartoon for a hot minute. And getting diddled by every other release this week, here's Editor Dylan.
So that's why I'm so tired. Well, people seem to enjoy when I don't get a lot of time to sleep or rewrite my scripts. So with that, Utopia, Creation of a Nation is a combination of civilization and limitation. Okay, that's an oversimplification, but by my observation, it's just an imitation. Now, the situation regarding the formation of your foundation all depends on location. Take into consideration that if your vegetation has poor irrigation, your population are subject to starvation. The resulting deprivation will hurt your reputation. Bet you wish I got some rest and relaxation, because damnation I need a vacation. Oh sweet, Jared gave me some PTO. Pacific Theater of Operation. Aren't I great at mastered segues? PTO for the Genesis is a tactical strategy game from Koei set during World War II. That's all I need to say really. Hearing Koei and tactical strategy tells you everything you need to know. It's like that one Koei game with the 3 romantic kings, or that game about that one ambitious Japanese gentleman, or even Genghis Khan 2, Clan of the Grey Wolf on the Genesis. It's just PTO, only with that one dude from World Heroes, Jay Karn, unless I'm remembering that wrong. I don't have time to look things up, but fortunately World Heroes released on the SNES this week. And yeah, that's definitely the same guy. No need to investigate any further. Nothing but cold hard facts on this first impressions segment with no research. Okay, I'm gonna level with you. I'm not a big history buff. Shocker, I know. But if there's anyone who could teach me all about history, it's Goofy. Didn't expect that, did you? Goofy's Hysterical History Tour for the Genesis is just the game I need to brush up on my history. It really makes sense when you think back to the Goof Troop theme. He'll solve the mystery and rewrite history. Goof Troop! Woo! No research. Anyway, Goofy has nightly janitorial duties at a historical museum. And the other janitor is Pete, of course, but I think they call him, like, Stinky Pete or something. He plots to sabotage our boy Goof's job by exchanging hats with other displays. Okay. Each level starts out the same. Goofy looks at an exhibit, cracks a history joke, and then he does something? But it never explains what. It just zooms out, the lights flash, and now you're fighting Peg Leg Pete with what I'm sure Plok would describe as a diddle gun. There's a lot more diddling in this episode than I'm comfortable with. Although, if we reference the Goof Troop theme again, it's still on brand. Danger, watch behind you. There's a stranger out to diddle you. Wait, that might be DuckTales. No, DuckTales is DuckTales, we always stick together. Why would I look things up if I'm never wrong, right? DuckTales. No. 9 games released on these 2 consoles this week in 1993. I definitely would have rewrote this entire thing if I had the time. And sleep. And energy. I did have an alternative. This is a rare occasion, but I actually have the commercial for every one of these games this week. But I'm sorry, they were either too long, too boring, or had a resolution in the double digits. Now I'm gonna ponder why Goofy's hat is yellow in the game, purple on the box, blue in the show, and green in my mind. This is like learning the Monopoly guy never wore a monocle. He just had a top hat and cane. It was Piccolo that wore the monocle. I'm gonna pass out now, bye.
Alright, thank you, Dylan. Here in the Collector's Corner, Street Fighter 2 on Genesis still sold over 1 million copies, making it easy to find. It released with a price tag of $69.95, and now a cartridge of it currently goes for about $8, and a complete one is only $20. There's also a different version where it has a cardboard box instead of the plastic one, though that one is still only like $25. Plok isn't anything too crazy either. You can currently get the game for about $27, and it's only $80 for a complete in-box one. Super Widget isn't very super. It released costing $59.95, and now also goes for about $27. Get one with the box and manual, and it goes up in value to $120. And that's it for today. Next week, an all-new console, an iconic adventure game, and one of the finest 16-bit RPGs ever made. I'm your host, Jared, and this was now in the 90s. Thank you so much for watching Now in the 90s. I want to thank some patrons like The J Lab, Major Mooch, and Sprinkles the Husky. Please like the video and leave a comment down below, especially if you played any of the games this week, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you already are a subscriber, thank you so much for watching this show every single Friday. I remember on the playground as a kid, like elementary school, one of the other kids came in and he showed off like, ooh, look at this. My Genesis now has a 6-button controller. And he talked about why it was better than Nintendo because it had 6 buttons, which was more than Nintendo had. And I asked him, oh yeah, what games do you use that on? What do you play with it? And he didn't have an answer. Although ironically, I would end up using this controller a lot to play the upcoming Eternal Champions. We'll get to that soon.